Hey, it's Habrock here, and today we're doing a swords overview. Now, I'm not going to be breaking it down between silver and steel swords. I'm going to be covering the effects these swords have and how that affects your gameplay and what modifiers will affect those swords if there are any. Let's get right into it. First up, we've got the feline sword. So that comes in silver and steel. That adds 15% to your fast attacks. Now, this doesn't affect crits, so it's just the hits that you're doing. Oils and potions do affect this sword. You're just looking at a straight increase in just your fast attacks to the relevant monsters. It's pretty basic, but for the gold cost, it isn't too bad. The Ursine sword. So this one increases your strong attacks by 15%. This only affects your strong attacks, it doesn't increase your crit damage. Oils and potions, much like the feline sword, will increase the damage here overall, but that will do it to any sword. For the price you're paying, it isn't too bad. The Woven sword, it increases your critical hit meter charge by 10%, so the rate at which it charges is just increased. What that means is you're going to be doing more crits more often, especially in longer fights where they become a bit more critical. Yeah, pun intended. It's not a direct effect, but your base damage and your crit damage are going to be affected by both potions and oils, so take that into account. So skills such as fixative, that means that when you apply a specific oil to that creature type, it's going to increase the amount of critical hit damage it takes. And then round about the middle, at level 15, you've got anatomical knowledge. That will increase your crit damage. So that's worth speccing into if you're going with a Woven. Here we've got the Griffin sword. This one will increase the effectiveness of your signs by 30%. This doesn't affect your crit or your fast or slow attacks. Petrie's filter does affect this sword. One thing to note, that this does affect Quinn. Now, it affects the amount of damage that Quinn reflects. It doesn't affect the amount of damage that Quinn will absorb. If you fully spec into Quinn and you drop a Petrie's filter with a Griffin sword, then you're going to be doing a fair amount of damage back and your signs are going to be doing a fair amount of damage. But generally speaking, it is limited on consumables. Here we've got the Manticore sword. This one increases the rate at which your signs cool down after using them by 30%. It just means you can cast your signs more often. Therefore, you're going to have them available more often, which means either you're casting Quinn more often and absorbing more damage and reflecting that back if you spec that way, or with Ard, you've got an interrupt that's consistently available and that's going to delay these monsters from attacking you. So if you combine that with the crit interrupt, perfect parry, and signs, no monster's going to be hitting you too much and you're not going to be taking too much damage. The way this affects your crit meter is if you spec into the signs tree, get adrenaline burst or intensity, then this is going to help you out quite a bit in terms of the crit meter because it will increase the amount of times you can crit. So signs will charge your crit meter. It is affected by Petrie's filter and Tawny Owl. That means you're going to increase the intensity of those signs and also speed up the cooldown on the signs so you can cast them more often. And so basically with Manticore sword, if you're spec'd in the right areas, especially in the signs tree, it's less about strong and fast attacks, it's more about blocking and casting signs, especially if you've got those signs consistently available. Kami, this sword will increase the amount of damage you do with your crit hits by 50%. That's a pretty big increase in the amount of damage you'll do, especially later on in the game. But early game, it's got its benefits. Oils and potions affect this sword quite a bit, given that they affect melee damage and damage overall. Early skills will affect this sword and its potential, especially the level 10 and 15 skills in the combat tree, and specifically we're talking anatomical knowledge. Early in the alchemy tree, you've got fixative. This will affect this sword quite a bit, just because it means the monsters you're going to be fighting are now vulnerable to crit by an extra percentage. So it means the sword does more damage, and that's quite an early skill that you can pick up at level 10. My one-time favorite, Meltith. So this one has a 15% chance to proc 100 fire damage, and that's 133 fire damage on vulnerable monsters. For fast attacks, that's fantastic. You're going to be proccing more often. Slower attacks, not as much, given that it doesn't increase the amount of damage that this sword does by its proc. So I would limit the sword to fast vulnerable monsters rather than strong attack vulnerable monsters. And then I would also use this against fire vulnerable monsters that are vulnerable to fast attacks, whether they're silver or steel. So I don't just use this on silver monsters. it's effective on steel monsters. Oils and potions do not affect this sword at all. Skills don't affect the sword at all. It is literally just the proc. Abeth, at least I think that's how you say it. This sword just increases the amount of experience points you get by 25%. There's no effect on this sword that is going to be affected by any of your skills or signs or alchemy skills. Thing is, this sword is still worth getting. It's got a big price point. I did a bunch of testing, and basically most swords were within 1 second of each other or 2 seconds of each other in terms of killing monsters. You're probably going to be using the sword more than any other, and the reason is, as you get better in the game, 0 and 1 skull monsters are going to get a lot easier, especially when you start increasing your skill trees and becoming a better player, getting those perfect parries in. It means that that 25% extra in experience points that you're getting means you level faster. The faster you level, the more skills you get. The more skills you get, the easier the game becomes. Until you're level 40, this is actually worth getting. Kaer Morhen Steel Sword. This one was a gift in the first week of play, so if you manage to log in and nab yourself this sword, don't buy any other steel sword, keep this one. Most of the monsters you're going to encounter are going to be 0 or 1 skull, and using the sword means you're going to be increasing the amount of experience you get per kill. More experience equals more levels equals more skills. And until you're level 40, you want to be getting those levels to get those skill points. I'd say this is one of the better swords. Yes, there are better like Kami, but if you are trying to save up some money, don't buy a steel sword just yet. Keep this one. Dawnbreaker, which is the sword you get from one of the quests in game. This one increases your damage by 10% at night. Yeah, it's a pretty good sword given that it's a blanket 10% damage increase, but most people play during the day. Alright, well, that was a bit of a rundown on the swords that are available in game. The funny thing is, early on, most of the swords will perform relatively the same, especially against easy monsters. So if you're taking on 0 skull monsters, there's literally 1 second, maybe 2 seconds difference in the speed at which you kill them. Final recommendations from me in terms of swords. Do you need to buy a silver sword? No. Should you buy a silver sword? Absolutely. Thing is, you can get by with just a steel sword, especially if you start practicing getting those perfect parries and skilling up all of that. The Kaer Morhen sword that you can get from the first week of play, that will sort you out for a fair amount of time. If you're going to go down the route of signs, then I would get the Manticore sword, and I'd put the Griffin sword second. If you're going to go down, the crit combat tree, then my recommendation is Kami and the Wolven. Now, I would probably go with the Wolven sword as it's cheaper, and it allows you to cast crits more often, and then once you've got the coin, go with Kami. Hopefully you found this video informative, that it's given you some idea into what sword you might want to save up for and what they do, how they're going to be affected by, talents, skills, potions, oils, and it might make fighting a bit easier for you. And it gives you an idea of where to put your gold once you get it. Feel free to get back to me. Just pop in the comments with anything else you want to see, if you want to discuss, my opinions and whether you agree or disagree. And then same, if there's any other videos you'd like to see, then pop them in the comments. Love to hear from you guys. And hopefully this helped you some way.